Welcome to Branding the Beltway. I'm Stacey Piper, a 25-year government marketing expert and the host of the podcast that helps you level up your B2G marketing game with actionable insider tips and real-world case studies. If you're in the business of doing business with the government, you're in the right place. Each episode delivers straight-to-the-point strategies from senior marketing leaders familiar with navigating the unique world of GovCon. In each episode, we'll first explore that month's topic on a macro level, talking strategy with CXOs. Then we'll deep dive into the same topic on a micro level, examining the practical approach of development and implementation. We're talking brand awareness, content strategy, and the campaign tactics that actually move the needle. Whether you're a CXO, a growth strategist, or marketing practitioner looking to strengthen your federal position, Branding the Beltway is your essential resource for driving results and winning more contracts. Let's connect strategy to execution and position your brand to win. Good morning and welcome to Branding the Beltway. This is Stacey Piper. I'm your host, and we have today with us Edyn Segura. Eddy is the Federal Events and Experiences Marketing Director with Microsoft Federal. Microsoft is helping government agencies achieve their missions by becoming frontier organizations, leading with AI, Copilot, and secure innovation to transform how work gets done. Welcome, Eddy. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself?
Yeah, how you doing? Thanks for having me on the podcast. Excited to be here. So, as you said, Edyn Segura, I've been doing public sector marketing now for a little over 10 years and marketing for, probably 20, all aspects. I think I'm what's considered a generalist, but had transitioned over into the public sector technology space a while back with my roots starting at DLT Solutions as a vendor marketer, helping a lot of brands create go-to-market strategies, and then moving over to software AG with integration platforms, and now over here at Microsoft because I wanted to be part of this AI revolution that's taking place. So it's an exciting time to be here and focus in on a role that is challenging me in new ways because I haven't been dedicated to events and experiences, but taking my generalist mindset, I think it's going to be a good change of pace and a new muscle for me to exercise.
That's fantastic. I think I've actually known you for all three of those public sector roles. So that's so cool. I guess it's been a while. So today's topic, we wanted to focus on building sustainable content engine for government markets. And as our listeners know, we usually spend the first half of the conversation with you advising on the topic from a macro lens to CXOs, talking high-level strategy. And then at the second half of the segment, we'll go behind the curtain on how to actually get it done. So I wanted to just jump right in. And in your words, when you're talking to internal stakeholders and your boss and executive leadership, why should leaders invest in content strategy and content creation?
Yeah, it's a good question and something that comes up and gets challenged all the time when it comes to content. But the reality is that I think the way I like to position it internally is that, content is the currency of trust, right? And I think today, with search engines and now AI platforms on how people are going out to do their own research, it's needed more than ever, right? Agencies buy from partners they like, know, and trust. And having your content out there and having a robust, well thought out content strategy, I think is key to all of it, right? How you show up, what platforms are rendering you as a result is something that you really need to think out long term versus what is the hot topic today that we want to generate leads on, right? So how are you building consistency for your brand over time is something that people don't think about because they have numbers to hit this month, right? But how do you build on that content strategy? How do you build on that brand? And how does that create long-term trust So as people are doing research for certain solutions that you might be in the market to sell, your name is constantly coming up, whether it's a search on a normal search engine platform, or if somebody's doing a deep dive into, Copilot or ChatGPT, you need to make sure that you have a robust plan that's rendering the right information at the right time for those, especially in government with these long buying cycles that we have. A well thought out content strategy could be the way you establish yourself as a thought leader for your brand all up or for an SME on your team. It could help accelerate pipeline influence, and it could shorten some of these long, GovCon sales cycles, right? So, being the way that AI platforms are being leveraged today, in particular, if government is going to shift towards creating drafting RFPs from some of these AI platforms, your content could get pulled in some of those automatically, right? Have to think about that when developing content, but having those conversations early with your C levels and letting them see that long-term vision, I think is better than I need funds for one research paper, right? Let them see the big picture and how this is going to help you long term.
Absolutely. There are so many things you said in there that I hadn't really thought we were going to talk about this session, which I love. But also the term, the currency of trust. I love that. I've not heard that before when talking about content. And it's true. I was literally thinking of like not even the content dissemination strategy or anything like that, but when you talk about how important your content strategy or even your types of content are for answer engine optimization and generative engine optimization too. That will be huge and continues to be huge as we pivot for that. How, in my mind, it's always been one of the most challenging things as a marketer to actually get the content produced. So, getting access to those technical SMEs, getting access to the thought leadership, and getting folks in the company to participate. In your experience, what are some things that leadership can do to align internal teams or incentive structures to encourage subject matter expert participation in content creation?
Yeah, I think that's something that I've dealt with a lot throughout my career because, as you know, right, the SMEs want to help close deals. They want to drive impact, right? They don't want to just be talking heads and going from one webinar to another webinar. One of the biggest things I'd always hear from my SMEs is, hey, I did this webinar for you last month, but nobody has come up to me afterwards and asked a question internally. None of the sales team has asked what came of that, how many leads, what are the follow-ups, right? So SMEs are feeling a little bit left out, that they're not getting that feedback as far as like, hey, is this helping accelerate a deal or did this drive a new meeting? And they need that recognition because they need to know if the message they're putting out there is landing, right? They need that feedback. But I think when you tie it up long term, uh, and you create a plan, you have to understand that SME's time is very valuable. So when you decide that you're going to take them kind of out of the game to help you develop some content, what type of asset can you create where you leverage them once and you can repurpose it multiple times and you don't necessarily need them anymore, right? So if you start with something long form like a webinar or an ebook where they get a deep dive interview with the SME and you can kind of take everything they're thinking, jot it down on paper, get some quotes and everything, right? That's the kind of stuff that you can say, hey, I need you to do this once. And then once that's done, I can repurpose it into multiple blogs, multiple social media posts, multiple snippets, videos, right? Multiple other things that you can get out of something so that they see, okay, you needed me once and we got 20 pieces of content out of this. This is definitely worth my time. I think leveraging a plan like that will definitely help them see the value that you're not going to come back to the well over and over and over again. because like I said, they don't want to be on the sidelines, right? They want to be in there making impact. I think the other thing you can look at is creating something like a content champion program where there is some recognition on their contributions on the marketing side, and they see that it's not just workload, right? Because most of the times for the SMEs, like this is above and beyond their actual job, right? They're not gold on how many webinars. If you do have a team where they do have a number to hit as far as how many public speaking engagements, I mean, that's awesome. But not every team has that luxury. Most of them have, sales targets to hit just like any other seller. So creating maybe some marketing driven recognition, right? To say, hey, this person's gone above and beyond. We're going to submit them for this internal, team player award, or we're going to make sure they get recognition because they've helped us land, these messages or at these events, right? And making sure that it's as frictionless as possible, work around their schedules and, really value their opinions when it comes to the direction of the content and making sure they're part of that planning stage so they have, you have their full buy-in, I think is key.
That's great. I love the idea of a content champions program. And also I've been in companies where they have publishing reward programs, and it's a different amount that you get awarded based on what type of article or book it is and where it gets published,
Hmm.
um, to promote that kind of thought leadership tilt. One of the challenges that I often hear, or objections I often hear from CEOs, is that they're afraid that they're going to give away their trade secrets. And I didn't know if you've had to navigate that, and if you had tips on how leaders can strike the right balance of giving enough content and transparency to make the content valuable without giving away the store.
Yeah, it is an interesting dynamic that everyone has some sort of special sauce, right? A lot of times teams don't realize that us as individuals may be that magic, right? So, are there multiple companies that have similar technologies? Yes. Are there technologies that can essentially do the same thing? You know, here and there's technical differences, but I think what customers come back to is who do I trust to get the job done the right way the first time, right? So I think that's the differentiation that most companies need to lean on is their people, the processes they have in place, and then the product that is actually going to get them there. But for the most part, when it comes to content, right, balancing transparency and oversharing, I think I focus on you share more of the how you solve problems, not the what that's involved in it, right? I think from a content perspective, you're driving curiosity to get that meeting, right? In that meeting is when you dive into the what, right? And the specifics on what you're going to do, and share the details on how you're going to get it done. But from a content perspective, I think you want to make sure that you're not diving so far in because a webinar is not the end all be all. People are not going to sit in on a webinar and fully understand your technology stack. They're not going to fully understand how you integrate with certain platforms, how you implement the solutions, and how you do things. What you want to do is educate on what are the key challenges that customers are coming to you for? How do you address them in a compliant, secure way? And what is the follow-up for them to dive into their specific challenge, right? I think that's the key right there is you always want them, you always leave them wanting more, right? You focus on the mission outcomes and the thought leadership, not exposing your IP, right? That's the main thing, right? Once you get to the meat of it, all of that should be happening in a personalized meeting because you need to understand what exactly is their challenge, right? And that's the key part for me is just making sure that they know like, hey, the 50 people you have on your webinar, there's probably 47 different problems. So you couldn't even answer and give everything away if you really wanted to.
Absolutely. I like that. And, the people as your differentiator, it just goes to show, so many companies are even scared to show their people, right?
Mhm.
They don't want them to get poached by competitors. They can be the differentiator, you know, when you bid them as key staff. But it is really critical to elevate those subject matter experts and put them out in front, because it can be the difference, and it can make customers feel connected with a brand if they know those people or feel like they know those people from the insights we've been sharing. You mentioned that your background is very much a generalist in the government marketing space, but that you have this new role with events. And I know that events are traditionally one of the biggest marketing budget line items in GovCon and technology firms. So when it comes to content for events, what recommendations do you have?
I think overall, the type of content that you want to land at events varies, right? Depending on the type of event. Is it technical? Is it a leadership, event? Is it a roundtable? But I think the most important thing that I can talk about when it comes to content related to events is consistency, right? The challenge that a lot of marketers run into is that today we're going to this event and it's, going after this, and you want to over customize everything and you want to be, create something unique, specifically for that event. I think you can flavor things that will speak to the audience that's at the event, but you have to be true to your message that you're trying to land long term. Don't stray too far and create something that's so unique that you can't leverage it again after the event because it doesn't make sense. So consistency is key. I think these days people are not picking up, the one pagers anymore. The QR codes are kind of hard to scan. Most people don't scan them and go back and look at, the 20 pieces of content you put on a landing page. I think the reality is we have to go back to what an event was originally meant for, and it's to have meaningful, impactful conversations and demo products if possible, right? If you have a booth where you can show things off. I think, again, just like any other virtual event or other activity you have, it's what is the follow-up to this event, right? What type of nurture campaign are you creating to get back to these folks that you scanned at your booth? Or how can you set up follow-up meetings to dive deeper into challenges they have? Having that all pre-planned and having a plan to have conversations about certain topics in your booth so you're already driving them towards certain activities afterwards, I think is key. And that'll determine, once those conversations happen internally and you understand what would a customer want to walk away with, or we could follow up with them after the fact. I think that'll help determine what type of content you need. It could be, hey, we're going to have to record a few 1 minute demo videos because we'll send that to them afterwards, right? If they don't have time to sit in the booth for the 15-minute demo, let's give them a sneak peek on a nurture email, and hopefully that'll drive the meeting and the follow-up for the deeper dive, right? Do we have an upcoming webinar where we're going to dive deeper into a certain topic or three of the topics that we're covering in our booth? Let's make sure they get invites to that so we keep them going in the journey, right? Everyone that comes to your booth is going to be at a different point in the buying cycle. So you have to be ready with a broad base of different types of content to kind of meet them where they are.
I love that. And I love how it's all part of a more integrated, comprehensive marketing program and not limited to an event strategy or a content strategy or a nurture strategy.
I just wanted to say, you have to look at an event as a moment in your plan. It is not the plan, right? So that's the part that people need to understand is, what is your plan for the year? How many either first party events or third party events are you going to participate in? And those are just moments within your plan to talk to people face to face. So take advantage of the fact that you are going to be there shaking hands, meeting people, and understand what are you doing between those moments to keep the conversation going.
That's a really good point. I was wondering, you've been at this for a while, and I know you're super passionate about content. Do you have a success story in that area that you would want to share?
Um, yeah, I mean, the most simple success story I can mention was when I was at Software AG. I remember I came in and I was running the state and local marketing at the time, and the leader for that team just kept telling me like, "Hey, we have this really great story um, around public safety where we've been integrating communications between law enforcement and other state agencies to kind of help identify warrants or different types of information so that all of the agencies can collaborate in making sure that people remain safe, right? Not only do for example, when a police officer pulls you over, the systems were integrated so they can check, hey, does this person have warrants? Were they recently in jail? Did they have any other issues, outstanding things? And not only does that help give the officer context on something that the individual may be dealing with, but it also kind of helps keep the driver safe because now the officer knows, like, hey, this person may be under a lot of stress because they just had A, B, or C happening with them, right? So that story is something that resonated deeply with customers, but they were telling people individually whenever they had meetings. So I was like, well, we just need to put this on paper, right? This isn't, I'm surprised it hasn't been done. And they said, yeah, let's do it. So, we partnered up with one of the government media publications, got a couple SMEs interviewed, created this ebook. Um, that ebook then created a structure for the story for all of the sellers to then go out and tell, right? So we took the outline of the ebook, and that became basically the cheat sheet for our inside sales team to talk about the story when they called out on customers and followed up. We took each chapter of that ebook and created it into an individual webinar, right? So we had a webinar series that followed up on the same story, right? We took the customers that were successful in it and drafted success stories that came from it. And then out of all of that, we were able to generate blogs. We used those as narratives for speaking engagements, and we had a consistent story. So one ebook that came from a story that had existed at the company before I arrived turned into a full year marketing plan into state and local law enforcement. And it didn't take much time from the SMEs because we could stagger their participation out based on quarterly webinars and different events that they were going to speak at anyways. But it created consistency because now it's like, hey, when you get on stage or when you tell the story, make sure you're following the same outline of the ebook. So we're consistent. And it drove a ton of revenue, a lot of opportunities, and the message resonated with the audience. So it was great.
That's a great success story. I'm glad you shared it. And it made me think of another question that we hadn't conceived of before we got on the call. And that is, the difference between paying for content production and syndication and producing that content in-house or disseminating it, organically or with your in-house team. Um, what should leaders be thinking about with regard to that balance? And do you have to have the big pocketbook to pay for that, 20, 30, $50,000 content syndication campaign with name your brand government media outlet?
Yeah, I mean it's a fine line and it depends on what you're trying to create. I think when you want to make sure you bring in industry level insights that is data that you need that's out of house. I think at that point is when you look at, okay, who is the third party that can help us draft this, that can give us that credibility from an industry perspective while we line them up with our internal SMEs to give the technical, thought leadership and kind of line us up. I think from that perspective, it's a good investment to kind of give you the narrative and make sure that you're aligned, your message is aligned to research, right? That's the value that a lot of these third parties can bring is that research into what exactly is going on in the government market that my solutions line up to. Once you have that, I think the value that you can get out of that, not only one of the things that people tend to do is say, I spent $20,000 on this research paper. That means I need X amount of leads from this paper in order to find value. I think that's a little bit too narrow of a way to think about it, right? You can say, okay, yeah, you definitely want to generate leads off of it. Don't get me wrong. I think that's always going to be the case. But if you can take that one asset that cost you $20,000 and convert it into a playbook and 20 other assets that you can do in-house now, especially with the rise of, Copilot and ChatGPT that can, repurpose that content into blogs, social media, cheat sheets, call scripts, email campaigns. You're getting way more than just one research paper, right? And if you divide it up by the 20 pieces of content that you got out, the 6 to 1 year long campaign and the narrative that you've now created for your sellers, for your speakers, um, 20 grand is really not that much. So it really just depends on how do you look at it long term and how do you position it that way so that your leader who's looking at the all up budget doesn't say one thing equals 20 grand, right? It's one plan equals 20 grand. And over time, all of that content is probably going to super exceed the lead goals you had in general.
I like that long-term view, and I think that's really critical for not just content, but really everything we do in government marketing with the long sales cycle. It is the long game. Um, so you mentioned AI for repurposing, and we talked about some of the benefits from having consistent, relevant, frequent content publishing for answer engine optimization and generative engine optimization. But I hear a lot of, especially small business owners, thinking they can replace marketers with AI and they don't need marketers, et cetera. So, what do you think is a reasonable expectation for business leaders, for what they can do themselves or their teams can do with the added benefit of some of the generative AI tools out there?
Yeah, I think it's a little far-fetched to assume that people are going to be replaced by AI. I think AI is only as good as the human ambition that is leveraging the tool, right? So if you want, AI is not going to wake up in the morning and just pump out marketing for you, right? That's just not how it works. You need a marketer to leverage an AI tool and to reason back and forth with it to really get the value out of AI, right? I think if you have somebody that does not have a marketing mind trying to speak to an AI platform and try to build a marketing plan, it's not going to render the best plan that you could have, right? You still need that marketing strategy. You need to understand how to communicate back and forth with that AI platform and ask the right questions so that you're building the right plan, right? I think in general, right now, AI definitely can accelerate, drafting, summarizing, the repurposing. It can handle, 60 to 70% of your first draft, but it still needs, humans to refine the nuance, to look at the storytelling and in our space, right, the regulatory guardrails that you need to make sure. There are cases, AI is getting better, but there's cases where, it's had, what do they call it? Uh, where it just kind of makes stuff up to sound good.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to have somebody review that stuff. I don't see it as much anymore as I did probably like a year ago, which is great. And I'm glad that it's doing, better on that end. But, the human element of all of this is always going to be necessary. I think the good marketers are going to understand how to leverage AI and help them speed up some of the day-to-day tasks and the repetitive things. There'll be agents that start coming out that even you and I can build on our own, just to get certain things off our plate. But what that's going to do is it's going to open up time for creativity, for strategy, and for driving more impact.
I like that. The human ambition driving the AI inputs and outputs. Well, I appreciate your insights on the macro level. We're going to take a quick break and come back and examine this same topic from the micro level for our government marketers. Stay tuned. This episode of Branding the Beltway is brought to you by Piper Strategies and Orange Slices. Piper Strategies, marketing that moves the needle. Piper Strategies is a full-service creative agency for leaders serious about growth. We decode the complex, translating mission-driven work into clear, compelling narratives. Our clients expand their reach, communicate with impact, and earn trust in competitive markets so they can win more work. We don't just deliver results, we build your internal marketing muscle. With Piper Strategies, clients grow with us until they outgrow us. It's a partnership-first, un-agency approach that not only gets you noticed and builds credibility, but also scales your brand and your team. Learn more at piperstrategies.com. Orange Slices, fresh intelligence for B2G success. Cut through the noise with Orange Slices, a trusted source for public sector insights, teaming opportunities, and procurement intel. With a playful name and a powerful platform, they're serious about making data accessible and usable so the entire GovCon community can thrive. For resources, visit orangeslices.ai. Welcome back to the second half of this Branding the Beltway episode with Edyn Segura from Microsoft. We are talking content strategy, and this half of the conversation is at the micro level, talking pragmatically about how government marketers can implement content strategy and repurpose their content. I wanted to ask you, Eddy, what's one piece of advice you have for marketing leaders struggling to get buy-in for investment in content strategy?
So what I would do is I would frame content as revenue enablement, not marketing fluff, right? It's not just something that we need for the website or, a pamphlet that you hand out at an event, right? This is, how you can truly influence pipeline and deal velocity, right? Kind of show metrics on any of your most successful assets that you've had to date and kind of help, paint that long-term picture. I'm going to keep going back to that over and over again throughout this podcast, which is, when you one-off something, it's really hard to convince somebody, what it is that you're trying to accomplish, right? If you want to talk about buying a car, yeah, it's going to help you get to the grocery store. You need to eat. But this car is going to help you see family, get to work, do everything else that you need to get done in your life. And when you look long term at what you're actually trying to accomplish, I mean, that's the way to frame something when you're trying to roll things up to the C level. I think they need to understand a vision and they need to understand how are you going to make the most out of that budget so it doesn't seem frivolous, right? You have to also have a plan on how you're going to repurpose content, right? If you're going to one-off something, it's going to be hard to justify that value for deep research or for a brand review or for something that you need long term. I think marketers, we understand what we can get out of a piece of content, but others that don't sit in our seat from a day-to-day perspective don't see that. So you have to actually frame it out and let them know, like, hey, this piece of content is going to lead to this, which leads to that, which leads to the other. It's not just one piece. It turns into sales enablement. It turns into our message at live events, at virtual events, and it gives us a playbook for social media to have a strategy and not wonder what should we say tomorrow or what are we going to do next week, right? It's a longer term play when you kind of frame that out. And I think that may be why certain folks struggle to get buy-in because they're not painting that vision. They're doing a one-off request.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that you included a lot of individual tips in there that in-house marketing leaders can leverage. With regard to events, we talked about that a little bit in the first half of the segment. How can in-house teams elevate their marketing kind of pre-event, on-site at the event, and post-event with pointed, deliberate content strategies to both drive, traffic to the booth, optimize booth engagement, and extend the conversation with registrants and booth visitors after the event?
Yeah, I think that's again, as part of your all up strategy, these events, which I'm calling moments in the market, right? You have to identify when they're coming up and start thinking about them months in advance, right? So if you are planning to be part of the agenda and you're going to be speaking at the event, how do you create some thought leadership blogs or LinkedIn posts in advance to start planting seeds and positioning your SME as a thought leader in that space, right? Letting people know, hey, I will be at this event talking about this, and here's some thoughts up front. Because not only are you going to drive people to your session at the event, but hopefully you're driving people to the booth to come ask more pointed questions and actually get to meet your SME and kind of shake hands, ask for a demo, and say, hey, you're touching on some challenges that we're currently having at our agency. I saw the LinkedIn post. I went to your session. I'd really love a demo and set up a follow-up meeting. So I think that pre-event content plan will definitely help, and make sure it's still consistent with your overall plan, right? Don't change and reinvent anything. Keep the consistency. You can take quotes from your SME for social media. You can have your SME create, 30-second videos to say, hey, I'll be on site to cover this, come by our booth and it's this number. That helps. I think one of the main things that we do very well over here at Microsoft is we make sure we have a full team call of everybody that's going to be on site, regardless of the role, and go through a deep dive, know before you go, right? Not only just the event logistics, but understanding our objectives, the message, the positioning. What are the pieces of content we have that we can point people to? What are we driving at afterwards? And then having that nurture plan already developed before we even get to the event. So once we get the leads after the fact or we have meetings, we know, hey, send them to this link, send them to this demo or this registration page, or help drive them to the next activity to keep them going on their buyer's journey. Um, Demo previews always help. Top 3 reasons to visit the booth um, are good. And the other thing you can do is kind of take previous events that have similar audiences and kind of show some highlights that came out of that event, right? Use that to show credibility and spark, some FOMO to be like, hey, at our last event when we talked about security, here are some of the top questions we got at our booth. If you have similar ones, come visit us and we can dive into yours, right? Kind of leveraging what's happened before for the next. And then post event, again, create those FAQs, answer those questions publicly. If one customer's wondering it, the next one is also. Do some follow-up blog posts on some of the key takeaways. Maybe you had somebody come talk to your SME after their session and ask some good questions. And maybe you're coming away saying like, hey, we did a 100 level presentation there. This is a good time for us to follow up with everybody and do a 200 level webinar, right? To kind of keep that journey going. So I think it's again, it comes down to a holistic plan and being ready for what you're going to do afterwards.
I think those are great insights. And I love the idea of beginning with the end in mind, because that will make everything just meld together and be so much more impactful. You mentioned that, when people come to the booth or people come to the website, they all have different questions or different challenges they're trying to solve, or they might all be at a different stage in the buyer journey. And so as you're planning your content and planning that kind of repurpose that you were talking about, where you get multiple pieces out of one interview or set of interviews, what are the things that in-house teams can do to map content to the buyer journey?
That one's always good, right? Because you always wanna have something available to meet the customer where they are, right? In their research during the current challenge that they have. Um, and you really have to look at the dynamics of your team. I think, based on my understanding of the audience of this podcast, right? Some government contractors have very small teams, right? And they are the magic. They are the SME. They are the marketer. They are the CEO, right? So you have to identify, okay, if I'm a very small shop, I'm not going to have budget or bandwidth to create content for every step of the journey. But maybe it's I need more awareness content to get people interested in who we are and what we do so I can drive more meetings, right? And then you are the person that's taking the consideration and the decision phase from one-on-one meetings, and you're kind of handling that in a more of a personalized way. So you kind of have to identify what is our reality and what are the needs that we need filled, right? So if it's I want more meetings, you look at we need to focus on more awareness to drive more meetings, more consideration phase content to help close that gap and getting them to sign up, right, for a webinar or a meeting, right? If you have larger teams, I think that gives you the ability to have more budget and figure out, okay, are we overdoing it on the awareness side? And are we getting a lot of low value leads that just aren't ready? You may want to have to flip the funnel on its head and look from an inside out perspective and say, okay, hey, we have a lot of awareness already and our brand is known, but we're getting a lot of low level leads that are very early in the stage. How do we start finding out who is ready to have conversations and further along their journey? And once you identify where your brand sits, I think that's the way you kind of figure out, like, okay, if I'm on the decision phase, and that's the content I need, do we need more ROI calculators or compliance guides, right? Or implementation playbooks to show people how you get it done? I think those are the ways you can kind of refine, but you have to look at what's the reality of your organization and where do you really have the need. Are you building a lot of pipeline but not closing deals? Then it's probably a middle of the funnel, right? Need. Are you getting a lot of people into meetings but you're not converting them? Then maybe they're not that final piece that convinces them or adds more trust at the point of sale is missing, right? Maybe you need some other content or some research that backs up the success stories that you guys have had. You kind of look at it that way. Or if hey, as soon as I get to meet with somebody, like we close deals 80% of the time, then it's like, well, we have to scale that some way. So how do you scale that? You create more of that thought leadership, that visionary, that example of like, hey, look at all these success stories. Come talk to us and we can do this for you as well, right? That's when you need that awareness. So I think once you establish where you are in that, in kind of that sense, I think it gives you a better frame on like how to map things to the journey that's appropriate to you, right? Because I don't think every company necessarily needs to say like, I have to have 30% content in awareness, 30% in consideration, 40% in decision. I think it really just comes out to what it is that you have. And then also, because nobody is, maybe not everybody's going to start from scratch. You have to figure out, okay, where is the need? Focus the energy there. And then for the next quarter, how are you going to build on that, right? How do you build on it? If your need is awareness, okay, we'll get that done. We'll start generating leads. But now let's start building on the consideration stuff, right? Let's start building on the next stuff. So over time, you're building a library that flows, right?
That's really smart. And I love the idea of, what do you need the content to do for you from a business standpoint and a growth standpoint, and treating that content investment as a growth driver and not a cost center. You mentioned conversion when we were talking about the funnel and the buyer journey. And this is always a very hot topic in GovCon, not so much in technology. It's kind of a given. But what advice do you have for marketers on which content should be gated, or which should be, open access to all who click on it?
Yeah, that one's I think that debate is going to go on forever, I think. That's a long-term one. You have to look today at um, how do the search engines use content, and now you have to start taking into consideration how do the AI engines look at content. AI engines cannot fill out forms and they can't read anything behind a gate. So you're limiting yourself, right? Search engines can't do it either. So you have to figure out um, how are you going to play the game on both sides of the house so that you show up either in a search engine if somebody knows what they're looking for and you have the engines giving the links and the recommendations, or you show up within a platform that's reasoning and kind of understands intent, right? So I think we'll just use like, one of the most frequent things that's gated is like the deep dive research that we know costs tens of thousands of dollars because you're normally leveraging like a third party to develop that. Um, you can gate that. Like I said earlier, do not bank on your ROI coming only from leads because it's going to be an uphill battle, right? To try to push that, and you're going to have to invest even more in it to do ads and do all this other stuff to get to your lead number. Build a repurposing plan so that you're getting more value out of that than just leads. I think you need to kind of strip out some of the context so that the AI engines understand it. You have to strip out the value props that you're identifying so that all of the engines, regardless of, search or AI, are picking it up, right? Because you want them to point back to your research. Now, will an AI engine point back to a gated asset? I don't know. I haven't leveraged that enough. So you may be shooting yourself in the foot on that one. But I understand that we're always going to have a need to gate things that we've spent a lot of money on. But can you have the SME that's interviewed already plan a webinar, right, to talk about the research, which then points people to download the full report? Can you have blogs that reference the research that points people back to download the research? Social media posts, right? All of that collectively, I think, is what's going to earn you trust in the market. It's going to earn you visibility. It's going to earn you that thought leadership for the SME and your research, and there's consistency, right? I think if you have um, a research playbook that you develop and you refresh it on an annual basis, I think people will come back to you and say, "Hey, where is this year's cybersecurity playbook? Where is that next year's?" Like government agencies that are establishing frameworks based on your playbook, I think, over time becomes something that would be amazing for you to have, but you have to have that plan. I think, you always ungate your value props, anything that's aligned, mission alignment statements, FAQs, author bios. I mean, some of these things are pretty obvious. I'd never gate, mission use cases or adoption stories for AI or customer proof points. But high value assets, I understand. You will gate it. And the other thing you might want to look at is just deciding like, hey, we're going to gate it for X number of months and just see how many leads we could drive and how the initial campaign to promote it went. And then we're going to ungate it and we're just going to leave it open and just have the market understand and see if it gets pulled into more results and if we drive more visibility. You kind of have to track the clicks that you get during the gating and the ungating and see like, hey, am I seeing twice as many eyes on this now that it's ungated? There may be more value in just opening it up, but you have to have that trust that the content is right for the market, and that people are interested in what you're talking about.
That's a really good point. I never thought about ungating it, 3, 6 months later. We're all moving so fast that it's like I make the decision, do it, and then just move on. But, you could, like you said, like you can just track, you can either set a point in time or you can just track the metrics. If you're losing a lot of people at that form and they're abandoning, then you can lift the gate sooner, etc. And what you were saying about repurposing, right? If you're repurposing that longer form content, which is valuable enough to gate, it is at the middle of the funnel where you're trying to convert, then hopefully you're getting enough of those value props and that content out in front of the gate in various blog posts and tip sheets and what have you, so that it can still feed those answer engine, platforms for search. So that's fantastic.
Yeah. And one thing I'd add is that when you develop a high cost piece of content like this, you don't have to wait for the world to come to you, right? You should proactively be identifying a high value target list that your sellers are going to send this research to and say, hey, you don't have to go fill out a form. I want you to have this because the content in there I think is super relevant to you and going to help you in some of the challenges that you're currently dealing with, right? So leverage the gating for maybe some unknown customers. But if you have high value targets in government, like don't wait for them to find you and see if they'll fill out the form. Just give it to them. I mean, you've already paid for it. And if it leads to a meeting or a conversion or maybe a follow-up, I mean, it's kind of paying for itself right there.
That's a great tip. Another thing that sometimes might not rise to the top because you're thinking of it as a paid content syndication or lead gen campaign, putting it into that work stream, and you're not really thinking about it from the direct seller, sales relationship for enablement. I love that. So what processes and tools have you found most useful in identifying which content to repurpose, or what new formats you can repurpose it into, or any like key themes or sub messages you can take out for layering and extension?
Yeah, I think on the tooling side, I mean, I'm I'm not going to say I'm biased, but we use Power BI and Copilot. And we have a ton of dashboards and a ton of data that we track here. But it is useful to kind of see, proactively like what types of assets, what themes are bubbling up, right? Maybe what searches are happening within websites to understand like, okay, people are finding us because of this, and is my content aligned to that, right? Or some of the challenges that I've seen over time is that maybe you get too technical on your white papers, right? And a lot of times, I've explained this for years when it comes to like virtual events. It's they'll you'll create a webinar that maybe talks about three different topics that all fall under one theme. And you're expecting the customer to sit in on a 1 hour long webinar to see if they hear about the one topic that they really care about that they're dealing with, right? So imagine a sales rep saying, hey, I know we had this conversation, we just did this webinar. Go ahead and scroll to minute 37. And then the subject matter expert talks about some of the stuff that we discussed, right? So why, people don't have time for that today, right? So if you're going to cover three different important topics within a theme, just break that up into three short videos, right? Create 10-minute tech talks that cover all of it. And if they're interested in the series, they can still watch all 30. But I think time is a big constraint these days. It's always been. We know attention has been a big thing. Um, Looking at some of that stuff is always interesting, and figuring out, how do you when you identify what is valuable, how do you make it more snackable? I know you and I were talking before we got on the podcast about snackable content and things like that. And how do you create snacks? Because what you're doing is you're just throwing crumbs out on social, on your website to again drive people back to the deeper form content, or hopefully, more importantly, drive people back to have that meeting with you. Because you can say like, hey, here's the top things you want to do in cyber, or how to set up your zero trust strategy, right? Um, but you really need a customer to kind of latch onto and resonate with one of those, and then they'll say, hey, you talked about something that we're literally talking about internally today. I'd like to talk to your team to see if you can help us out, right? So you have to take that one piece of content you developed, and you have to find out what are the most important points here, and you have to start distributing them separately to see which one resonates the most. And once you do find out which one it is that resonates the most, that's when you start diving in and you find out, okay, let's repurpose there, right? You should always have some form of simple survey at the end of your webinars to identify, hey, which of the topics, was most important to you. You could talk about, if you're written blogs, right, each one should cover one topic, so you know exactly what it was that drove people to the blog and different things like that. But I think when you originally create the content, you should always have a repurposing plan, regardless of whether it performed or not, because the content needs to have a chance to resonate with the market. You need to give the content enough time in the market to resonate. Nobody's going to read your blog or your ebook the first day you put it out, right? I think one of the ways I've explained it to people over my career, I said, when you create an amazing movie, you don't put it in one theater and wait for the world to come to you, right? You put it everywhere. You have commercials, you put it on buses, you put it in the metro, you have, hundreds of theaters across the globe that are sharing it, and you're going to where the customers are, and those that it resonates with will attend and watch your movie, right? Think of your content that way. How does your content show up in AI? You have to make a plan for that. How does it show up in search engines? How do you display it on your website? Is it hidden in the back or is it on the homepage, right? Who's talking about it on social? Is it just your company post, or is your CEO, your SME, and your sales team sharing it, right? All of these things need to be part of that plan. And we assume these things will happen, but you have to have more intent behind it, and you have to have an actual plan and internal commitments to make sure you get the true value out of your content.
That's fantastic. This has been such a rich conversation, and I see that we could use an entirely separate episode talking about content dissemination. But I really appreciate your time. I love these big points that you had around consistency and long-term planning, long-term impact, and really the idea that you can use content to drive visibility, trust, in-person meetings, and conversion. So thank you so much, Eddy. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I hope this helped somebody out there.
I'm sure
I
it will.
appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Branding the Beltway. If you're looking for an outsourced marketing partner or fractional marketing leadership who truly gets the GovCon sector, Piper Strategies is the team to know. We're not just here to deliver, we're here to empower. For resources or to inquire, visit piperstrategies.com.